Hello everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level. I'm an ordained minister, kirtan artist, and musician. And today I wanted to talk about how spiritual awakening leads to a shift from outer goals to inner goals. Before I get into the talk, however, I do want to thank the community that makes these talks possible without a paywall, and those are my patrons over on Patreon. If you want to join that community, please check out the links below. You can also help by liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting on YouTube. You can also help by shopping. So my friend and I created a shop with some fun merch for you if you like such things. Check it out. All right, so spiritual awakening leads to a shift from outer goals to inner goals. What do I mean by this? The average person assumes that they cannot feel happy, fulfilled, content, loved without certain things happening in the world outside. And from the standard egoic perspective, this makes perfect sense. This is, you could say, the egoic perspective. And what we find is that perspective makes us powerless, it makes us dependent. We are very much in a position where we feel like we probably need to manipulate others, and we also need to do a lot in order to get anything of value in this world. In fact, on my YouTube feed, there are all kinds of people who talk like that. They basically say, if you're a man, you need to suck it up and do and do and do. Otherwise, no one's going to respect you. And why should they? Yada, yada, yada. So very common perspective. What we find with awakening, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So I want you to understand that when I talk about spiritual awakening. We read stories of Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie's awakening. It seemed like it was like all at once. Whether it was or not is not important. That's not what I see happening to most people. Most people, I find, they have an awakening and then it's sort of a creep. And slowly over time, that, you can call it energy of awakening. I don't really know what to call it. Whatever it is, it slowly burns away the egoic perspective and structure more and more. It weakens it. And they find themselves either voluntarily or sometimes very much against their will surrendering to this new perspective. But basically what we find is there's a shift from trying to change how we feel inwardly from manipulating the outside. Okay, that's the egoic perspective. I build a huge business. I feel better because I built the business. I want love. Well, then I get a partner and then I feel loved. The spiritual perspective is exactly 180 degrees to this. And one of my teachers, Fred Davis, says this a lot. He says that the spiritual perspective is 180 degrees from the egoic perspective. And I agree wholeheartedly. It's almost anything that we would consider common wisdom, secular wisdom, is going to be almost the opposite of what we might call spiritual truth. I have no idea why this is the case, but this is what I find. So again, this idea of I manipulate the world, it gives me things, and then I feel content. Versus the spiritual perspective, which is I go inside and I create contentment. I find contentment inside of myself. I find love inside of myself. I find the things that I want seemingly out there in here. Now, I do need to be clear because at a certain stage, a certain point, outside and inside collapse. It doesn't really make sense to say inside of me, outside of me. It doesn't, it collapses. and there stops being an inside and outside, self and other, object and observer. That those things really start to break down at a certain stage. But whether they have or not, basically the way I'm talking is from the perspective of somebody kind of newer to this, that someone who's still experiencing inner and outer. So if you're beyond that, great. But for those who aren't, it's going to feel like they are now more concerned with how they feel. And at a certain stage, you begin to learn that you can change how you feel without changing what's going on outside. And this is a very, very powerful place to come from. This is a very powerful realization. And I first experienced this using strictly what we might call traditional spiritual tools. So the tools that we find in some of the wisdom traditions like Buddhism, Taoism, and yoga. And I found that using these tools, even though I didn't necessarily have great success in the world, that I felt amazing. I mean, really incredible. It's hard to describe like how great I could feel. I didn't even really know that that was possible, or I thought maybe I would have to have, a yacht and a mansion and, all the boxes ticked. And what I found with these tools is I could have almost none of those boxes ticked. I could be living very close to poverty and yet feel so full and so happy and so grateful for this life. And I can only speak for myself, but that to me is the most important thing. I've had experiences where I was getting what I want and I didn't feel that. So very interesting, the disconnect. I can get things outside and not feel full. And yet I can not get anything on the outside and feel full. This is a very important realization that I had, at least for me. And I'm sharing with you because it might be for you as well. Then later on, I became aware of the teachings of law of assumption. And that's taking things to the next level, I can say, where it's saying that if you really give yourself the things that you want, that in the end, they will show up reflected in the outside world. Now, again, for somebody new to this, they might say, well, how is that even possible? Just because you change how you feel doesn't mean the world will respond. But as I said earlier, at a certain stage in your development, you realize that there really isn't an inside-outside. There really isn't a self and another. There really is just one thing going on. Again, as my teacher Fred Davis would say, there's only one thing going on and you're it. So if this is true, then the idea that working with how I feel, working with being, right? Who am I? Who do I say that I am? And very often that's reflected in how we feel. It's reflected in our thoughts. It's reflected in our assumptions. Who do I say that I am? This is going to reflect outwardly eventually. And the beauty of this is it really doesn't matter if it does or not. One of the things I realized more recently about manifestation that took me a long time to grasp was these people were saying you can manifest whatever you like, but then they would say ignore reality, ignore the 3D experience. And it just didn't make any sense to me. But then I realized that when you truly manifest what you want inwardly, when you give yourself what you want in an effective way, and that's really the trick, you don't care if you get it on the outside anymore. You already had it. You've already given it to yourself. So you're no longer looking for it or seeking for it outside. All right, everyone, I'm going to keep this one short today. So as always, my intention is that this is helpful. If you have any questions for me, please reach out and let me know. Otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Namaste and have a beautiful day.